The rooster hadn't even crowed yet when I heard a loud, aggressive pounding on my front door. At first I thought it was a neighbor needing help, or maybe an emergency. But when I checked the clock 6:02 a.m., my stomach tightened. Nobody visits at that hour unless something's wrong. I grabbed my robe and shuffled to the front door, my farmhouse creaking beneath me like it had for generations. When I pulled the door open, a sharp-eyed woman in a stiff suit stood there with a clipboard in her hand. Her hair was pulled so tightly into a bun, it looked like it might snap, and she wore that kind of pinched expression that made you feel guilty before you'd even spoken, Mr. Dalton. She asked curtly, her voice crisp and cold. "That's me," I replied. Cautious, "I'm Karen Miller, head of the Countryside Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here to inform you that you are in violation of multiple community bylaws. Effective immediately, you're being evicted from this property." I blinked. Evicted? At 6 in the morning? On my own land? "You've got the wrong place, lady," I said, squinting at her. "This farmhouse has been in my family since the late 1800s. My great-grandfather built it with his bare hands. There's no HOA out here." Karen pursed her lips, clearly offended by my tone. "Actually, sir, this property falls under the extended jurisdiction of Countryside Estates. We've recently annexed this land, and you are now subject to our rules. That barn, for instance, violates color code standards, and your rooster he crows far too early and disrupts the peace. This is your eviction notice." She shoved a folded paper at me, which I didn't take. My hands clenched into fists. I'd dealt with difficult people in my life, but this was different. This wasn't just some busybody neighbor. This woman was trying to throw me out of the home that carried my family's entire history, ma'am, I said slowly, steadying my voice. "You've got no right to be here, and you've got no authority to evict me. I'm not part of any HOA. Now, why don't you turn around and head back before you make this morning worse for both of us?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand. The HOA has absolute authority over this land. If you refuse to comply, we'll call the sheriff and have you forcibly removed." The audacity of it all made my blood boil. I wanted to slam the door in her face, but I also knew the type power-hungry, itching for a fight, desperate to prove they're in control. So instead, I just gave her a look. "I'll tell you what," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "You come back with your so-called sheriff, and I'll be ready." I closed the door, heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, my golden retriever. Scout whined softly, sensing my agitation. I rubbed his head, whispering, "Don't worry, boy. No one's taking this farmhouse." But deep inside, I knew this wasn't over. Karen Miller wasn't the type to back down, and neither was I. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't just some farmer and worn out. Boots, I carried something in my wallet that had stopped more powerful people than her in there. Tracks the embossed leather of my attorney general. Identification card burned against my chest like a hidden weapon, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. I barely had time to sip my morning coffee before the sound of crunching gravel echoed across my driveway. Scout barked, ears perked, tail rigid. Through the window, I spotted the same stiff-suited Karen striding up my porch with another figure in tow this time. A sheriff's deputy in full uniform, Karen was all smiles now. Smug and self-satisfied, as if she'd already won. The deputy, a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, looked less certain. His face carried the weary expression of someone who'd been called out on. One too many neighborhood squabbles. I opened the door before they could knock. Leaning casually against the frame, "There he is," Karen snapped, jabbing a finger toward me like I was some criminal on the run. "Sheriff, this man is trespassing on HOA land. He refuses to vacate. I want him removed immediately." The deputy gave me a measured look, then glanced at her. "Ma'am, let's slow down a second." Karen huffed, shaking her clipboard like it was a badge of authority. "There's nothing to slow down. He's in violation. He's got an unapproved barn, livestock, and listen to this rooster that crows before 7 a.m. The community won't tolerate it." The deputy turned back to me, clearly uncomfortable. "Sir, may I see some proof of ownership? Just so I can clear this up." I nodded, calm as a still pond. Of course, Sheriff. I disappeared inside for a moment, returning with a thick leather folder. I opened it right there on the porch, flipping through the pages until I found what I needed. This here is my deed. This land has been in my family since 1891. I've paid the property taxes every single year on time, and nowhere in this paperwork does it say I belong to any HOA. The deputy studied the deed carefully, his brow furrowing. Looks legitimate, he muttered, but Karen wasn't ready to quit. That's outdated paperwork, she barked. We've annexed this land into countryside estates. He's now under our governance whether he likes it or not. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. Annexed. I wasn't aware an HOA had the legal authority to annex private farmland. Karen flushed, but pressed on, voice rising. It's in our bylaws. I emailed the county about it. That was the moment I decided to end this charade. I reached slowly into my wallet, pulling out a sleek leather card holder. With deliberate care, I flipped it open, revealing the polished emblem of the Office of the Attorney General. The deputy's eyes widened instantly, his tone shifting from cautious to respectful. Sir, you're with the Attorney General's office? Karen, however, looked confused, almost annoyed. What does that have to do with anything? She demanded. I met her glare, my voice steady and cutting. It has everything to do with it. You've come to my door at 6 a.m, trespassed on my land, threatened me with unlawful eviction, and now you're attempting to coerce law enforcement into abusing their authority, all based on nothing but your clipboard and arrogance. That's harassment, Ms. Miller, and I don't take kindly to harassment. The deputy cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Ma'am, he said firmly to Karen, I can't enforce HOA bylaws, and I certainly can't evict someone from land they own. This is outside our jurisdiction. Karen's jaw dropped. What? No, you can't just ignore me. I'm the head of the HOA. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a razor's edge. And I'm the man who investigates abuse of power in this state. Do you really want to keep pushing this, Ms. Miller? For the first time, the color drained from her face. She stammered, opening her mouth, but failing to find words. The sheriff, meanwhile, tipped his hat politely to me. Sorry for the trouble, Mr. Dalton. I'll be on my way. Ma'am, I suggest you do the same before you find yourself in legal hot water. Karen stood frozen for a moment, fight visibly draining out of her. She finally spun on her heels, stomping down my steps like a child denied dessert. As their vehicles rolled away, I stood on my porch, Scout leaning against my leg, tail wagging. I could feel my great-grandfather's spirit in the soil beneath me, steady and unshakable. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't finished. People like her never stopped at the first defeat. She'd be back-end next time. She'd bring reinforcements, and when she did, I'd be ready. The farmhouse had always been a sanctuary to Mia, a place where morning sunlight poured through lace curtains, where the land smelled of fresh hay and damp soil, where history lived in every creak of the wood. But after that ugly morning encounter, I could feel something darker hanging over it, like a storm cloud refusing to move. For a few days, things were quiet. I fixed the fence out back, mended a section of the barn roof, and tried to convince myself that Karen had gotten the message. Scout, my golden retriever, seemed calmer too, chasing squirrels and napping under the oak tree. But my gut told me the fight wasn't over. I was right. It started with letters. Bright red envelopes stuffed into my mailbox, each one stamped with the HOA seal. Violation notices, they read in bold letters. The first accused me of having non-regulation. Livestock. The second claimed my property degraded the community aesthetic. The third, a personal favorite, insisted my tractor was an unapproved vehicle. I chuckled bitterly as I read them, shaking my head. They really don't quit, do they, Scout? Then came the threats. Emails, voicemails, even a hand-delivered letter demanding I attend an emergency compliance hearing at the HOA clubhouse, a mile down the road. The language was absurd, like I was some tenant in their kingdom, summoned before a royal court. Part of me wanted to ignore it all. But another part, the part of me that had sworn an oath to uphold justice, knew I couldn't let their harassment continue unchecked. If they could do this to me, they could do it to anyone, so I went. The clubhouse was a gleaming, oversized building that looked more like a country club than a neighborhood office. Polished stone, manicured hedges, fountains gurgling out front. Inside, it was all high ceilings and fake chandeliers, kind of place meant to impress rather than serve. When I walked into the main hall, a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward me. The HOA board sat behind a long mahogany table, papers stacked neatly in front of them. And there she was, Karen Miller, seated at the center like a queen on her throne, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Dalton," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "How kind of you to join us. Please take a seat." I remained standing. "I won't be here long." Karen tapped her papers dramatically. "We've reviewed your multiple violations and voted unanimously that your presence is incompatible with the values of countryside estates. Effective immediately, you are to vacate your property. Failure to do so will result in daily fines of $1,000, a lien placed on your land, and eventual foreclosure." The crowd of board members nodded along, smug and silent. My chest burned with fury, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You're threatening to steal my family's land over a rooster in a red barn." Karen's smile widened. "Over your refusal to follow the rules everyone else abides by." I stepped closer to the table, my voice steady but ringing through the hall. "Your rules don't apply to me. This is private farmland, not part of your development. You're trespassing into authority you don't have." Karen leaned back in her chair, clearly savoring the moment. "Tell that to the judge after we bury you in fines." The board chuckled, shuffling their papers like the matter was already settled. I scanned the room, noting how emboldened they all looked, sitting there in their suits and pearls, drunk on a false sense of power. And that's when I pulled out the folder I'd brought with Mitha, one they didn't expect. Inside were not just my property deed and tax records, but also a series of legal documents from the Attorney General's office. I laid them flat on the table, my voice sharp and unwavering. "Here's what you don't seem to understand. You're attempting to annex land without legal authority, harass a property owner, and conspire to commit financial fraud. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. And I have the authority to investigate every single one of you." The room went still. The smug smiles faded. Karen's jaw clenched as she stared down at the golden seal stamped on the papers. "You're bluffing," she spat. But her voice lacked conviction. I leaned in closer. "Try me." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, but I also saw defiance, the kind that burns hottest before it dies. Karen wasn't going to walk away quietly. Not yet. And I had a feeling the next move she made would be her most desperate one yet. Leaving the HOA clubhouse that evening, I could feel every eye in the room on my back. Some were wide with shock, others narrowed with resentment. But Karen's stericity, venomous, burning with humiliation, was the one that lingered. For a moment, I thought she might finally back down. But people like Karen don't surrender. They scheme. 2 days later, her retaliation arrived in full force. I woke to find a large orange notice stapled to the fence post at the end of my driveway. "Property foreclosure in process," it screamed in block letters. Beneath it, the HOA threatened to seize my land for unpaid fines that now totaled over $20,000. I laughed out loud. Well, it wasn't amusement, it was disbelief. They doubled down on their fraud, hoping intimidation would do what their bluster hadn't. But intimidation only works on those who don't know their rights. And I knew mine better than most. That afternoon, I drove into town and filed a formal complaint. Within hours, an official investigation was opened by the Attorney General's office, not by me, but by my colleagues, who didn't take kindly to hearing how one of their own was being harassed. The following week was a storm Karen never saw coming. Investigators combed through HOA records. They found discrepancies in their finances, unexplained fees funneled into private accounts, and evidence of overreach into properties that had never legally belonged to them. Homeowners, long silent out of fear, began speaking up. Stories poured in about threats, bogus fines, and relentless harassment. Karen had built her little kingdom on intimidation, and now it was crumbling. Final blow came at a special county hearing. Karen stood at the podium, her face pale, but her voice still sharp. She insisted she had authority, that the bylaws gave her power, that the HOA was simply protecting community standards. But when the county commissioner held up my deed, stamped and sealed by the state, and declared, "This property has never fallen under HOA jurisdiction," the room erupted in gasps. Karen tried to argue, but every word only dug her hole deeper. The investigators presented evidence of her fraudulent annexation attempts, the illegal fines, even the threats she'd issued against other homeowners. Finally, the commissioner's gavel struck the desk. The actions of this HOA, under Ms. Miller's leadership, constitute harassment, abuse of authority, and attempted fraud. Effective immediately, the board is dissolved, pending further legal review. The room buzzed with relief and disbelief. For the first time, I saw Karen deflate. She wasn't the queen of the HOA anymore, just another person exposed for what she truly was. When it was over, I stepped outside into the evening air, the sun dipping low over the fields. Scout bounded toward me, tail wagging, as if sensing the weight that had lifted. A few neighbors approached, shaking my hand, some even with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," one woman whispered. "We were too afraid to fight back. You stood up for all of us." I looked out across the countryside, the fields stretching wide and golden, the old farmhouse standing proud against the horizon. My great-grandfather's spirit felt close that night, whispering through the rustle of the wind in the cornfields. No clipboard, no HOA, no self-proclaimed queen could ever take this land. Not from me, not from my family, not from the people who called this community home. A scout nudged my hand. I smiled faintly. Justice wasn't always easy. Sometimes it meant standing alone at 6 a.m, robe and all, against someone determined to strip you of what was yours. But when you carry truth and a little authority, justice always wins in the end. And Karen Miller? Well, the only eviction that ever happened was hers, from the throne she built on lies.